You're listening to Short History Shorts audio, where history speaks louder than images. When we think of Carthage, our minds often leap to Hannibal's elephants, Punic naval prowess, or the final fiery showdown with Rome. But behind Carthage's military feats and commercial empire stood a complex, often misunderstood political system. Unlike the Roman Republic, which openly celebrated civic participation and left behind copious constitutional records, Carthage was more secretive, its records mostly lost, leaving us to reconstruct its governance through Greek and Roman commentators, archaeological evidence, and comparative logic. At the heart of Carthage's political system were two key pillars: an oligarchic ruling class dominated by wealthy merchant families, and the Suffetes, or judges, who functioned as the republic's chief magistrates. This script explores how that system worked, who held power, how they were selected, and why Carthage's political structure influenced both admiration and suspicion from contemporary observers. Carthage's political roots trace back to its Phoenician heritage. As a former colony of Tyre, Carthage inherited many elements of Levantine governance, including city councils and priest kings. However, by the time Carthage emerged as a Mediterranean power in the 6th and 5th centuries BC, its system had evolved into a unique blend of oligarchic control and limited republican institutions. At the top of the pyramid were the Suffetes, a Latinized form of the Punic term Suffetum, meaning judges. There were always two Suffetes elected annually who presided over state matters, religious rituals, and judicial decisions. Their role was somewhat analogous to the Roman consuls, but with less direct military command and more focus on civic and religious leadership. Unlike monarchs, Suffetes were not hereditary and were expected to rotate out of office after their one-year term. Yet despite this outward appearance of republicanism, real power rested in the hands of Carthage's elite families, such as the Barcids and Magonids, who controlled commerce, land, and naval fleets. These families used their wealth and client networks to dominate the city's internal councils and vote blocks, creating a de facto oligarchy. Beneath the Suffetes stood a powerful Senate or Council of Elders, known from Greek and Roman sources as the 104. Although this number may have varied over time, this council held immense power, often acting as a deliberative body that reviewed policy, directed military actions, and mediated disputes among the elites. Members of this council were not elected by the populace, but appointed through opaque, elite-dominated processes, typically from among the wealthiest merchant families. This was not a populist institution. It was designed to insulate decision-making from the lower classes, preserving stability but sacrificing broad-based participation. Parallel to the council was the Tribunal of 104, a quasi-judicial body that acted as both a high court and a disciplinary board for generals and high-ranking officials. Think of it as a mixture of a Senate oversight committee and a military tribunal. Even great generals like Hamilcar and Hannibal Barca could be hauled before this body if accused of overstepping authority or bringing disgrace on the city. Unlike Athens or Rome, Carthage lacked a formal assembly of citizens to pass laws or elect magistrates broadly. Instead, there existed occasional popular councils or tribal votes, but these appear to have been rare and ceremonial, used more to ratify elite decisions than to generate them. Aristotle, writing in the 4th century BC, famously praised Carthage's political system as one of the best in the ancient world, citing its stability and resistance to tyranny. But he also noted the corrupting influence of money, warning that offices could effectively be bought, a sign of creeping plutocracy. By the time of Rome's expansion in the 3rd century BC, Carthage's political system had grown rigid, with the ruling class resistant to reform and fiercely defensive of their privileges. This created friction with military commanders like Hannibal, who sought broader authority and popular support, but were hemmed in by jealous aristocrats back home. Religious institutions also played a vital role in Carthaginian governance. High priests and temple officials often overlapped with political elites, and major decisions, including war declarations, required religious approval. The gods of Carthage, especially Baal-Hamon and Tanit, were not mere spiritual figures. They were seen as active participants in state affairs. Sacrifices, omens, and temple rituals could delay or propel decisions, giving religious leaders significant indirect power. Unlike Rome, where the Senate and priesthood were formally separated, despite overlapping memberships, Carthage's civic and spiritual spheres were intertwined. One of the most intriguing features of the Carthaginian political system was its emphasis on collective leadership and restraint. No individual, no matter how wealthy or militarily brilliant, could easily become a dictator. This made Carthage politically stable over centuries, but also slow to adapt and often hostile to innovation or centralization. The tension between the city's oligarchic councils and its military leadership became a major fault line during the Punic Wars. Hannibal, despite his victories in Italy, struggled to gain full support from the Carthaginian Senate. Supplies were delayed, reinforcements denied, and rival factions undercut his strategy. Ultimately, the city's political conservatism may have cost it the war. In its final years, after the Second Punic War, Carthage attempted modest reforms to broaden political participation and rebuild its economy, but the old elite structure remained largely intact. Rome, wary of a Carthaginian resurgence, used internal divisions and senatorial intrigues as pretexts to provoke war. When the Third Punic War broke out in 149 BC, Carthage's oligarchic system could not marshal a fast, unified response. By the time the walls fell in 146 BC, the political institutions of Carthage, once praised by philosophers and feared by generals, were swept into the ruins. The Suffetes vanished, the Council of Elders dispersed, and Rome erected a new colonial structure in its place. Today, the legacy of Carthage's political system is largely forgotten, overshadowed by the military campaigns it once supported. Yet in its structure we see a complex, tightly controlled republic, a commercial empire that feared mob rule and sought to govern through wealth, tradition, and elite consensus. Its failure was not in its design, but in its inability to evolve fast enough in the face of existential threats. Carthage was not a tyranny, nor a democracy, but something in between, a unique experiment in oligarchic republic governance, now lost to time, but preserved in fragments and ruins.